Hey everybody, it's Doodleos here. How you doing? Alrighty then. So today is going to be a game design talk, and I was going to have a talk about orthogonal unit differentiation in games, which is completely underrated. It's one of those things that if you're making a first-person shooter game, if you're making a third-person shooter game, and it also applies to all different kinds of games as well, like RPGs and stuff. If you're doing those kind of games, this is an absolute must-know thing about game design. Okay, this is like just one of those things you have to know. And let me think here. Um, it's best to know. It's best to know this kind of stuff for longevity. That's what it is. So there's a lot of things that go into a game, like how to give it longevity, how to make it playable years from now. And this is just one like cornerstone, absolute must-have if you need it. So I'm going to talk about it a little bit. I'm going to be playing Doom while I do. I'm going to be playing it on ultra violence. I can't really see the screen, so I'm just going to take off my glasses. Sorry, guys. And I'm going to play some Doom. So, here it is. I'm playing Doom. So I'm going to talk about O.U.D, and it's a pretentious term. Very pretentious. And I forget who came up with it. I'm really sorry. And I know someone's going to... I know people know, but I don't. It was a developer of Deus Ex, I believe, but I forget what his name was. And he came up with the term O.U.D, Orthogonal Unit Differentiation. And what that is that things in your game are actually differentiated. So, this pistol here, well, not fist, this pistol here is drastically different than this shotgun, right? And the idea behind that is that no decision is obsolete. Like, there's no, the decision to switch between my shotgun or keep my pistol, or vice versa, to switch to my pistol or keep my shotgun, is a meaningful decision. It affects the outcome of the game because they're very different from each other. And there's like just a few things that I want to show here, if I have time. So I'm going to play this for a little bit and get to my point. So the enemies are also different. So you have enemies, and I guess you could think of these barrels as kind of like a part of Doom's decision making as well, because later you'll get a rocket launcher and you'll be like, well, maybe I should shoot the barrel because it'll save on rockets, and that's kind of interesting. And there's just always decisions being revolved around explosives in the environment, which is not something you really see in today's games, except for if but you see here, there's lots of explosives and stuff in today's games. But what I especially want to elaborate when I want to elaborate on when I say that is that these here are positioned differently than in most games today. Explosives in most games today are they put a bunch of red barrels in one spot, and then it's like, oh, the enemies are walking by it, and it's like a fixed event or something, right? These are positioned so that enemies who are walking around randomly might get near them, and then you can shoot them, right? And it's a part of the combat loop, not just a fixed event. Okay, so one of the things I want to specify is the design of the enemies in this game are ingenious, and I want to get to that here right away. I'm going to get the chain gun. I believe that's what it's called. Yeah. Okay, so this is the interesting thing that I think I just love this about this game, is you have a shotgun, which is good for these guys because it kills them in one shot. And with the shotgun, I can kind of go around corners and shoot like this because its fire rate is different. That's one of the things that makes it separate from the other weapons. And then with the chain gun, I get to it here. I might just be able to actually, in a minute here. Is that a Doom 2 cheat? So it's not working. There's a guy there. So I find that in like a lot of situations, it's kind of like, oh, it's cool to, you're trying to survive or whatever because it's a more, you're playing on ultraviolet, which is more difficult than normally. And I find that this game, especially, is the kind of game where you can kind of do whatever you want and it doesn't really matter. You can use kind of whatever weapon you want. But when you get into harder difficulties, it becomes something special because you'll have these guys here, you mow them down with the chain gun, and then you shoot these guys with the shotgun. That's what I do because I just think it's fun. And there's always something to it. Like, the big guys will get in the way sometimes of you trying to get the little guys, and you just kind of got to weed the chaff before finishing off the big guys. And the reason why that's a thing is because any given when you're making decisions, any given like damage dealer in a game, given that it deals the same amount of damage as another unit, is going to be a priority if it has less health because that threat can be eliminated quicker. Right? Like if I've got, a 20 HP unit and a 50 HP enemy that are the same statistically in every other regard, I'm going to go after the 20 HP one first because, I'm going to shoot 80 shots no matter what, say, right? To kill both of them. But, like less shots in, I'm going to be taking less damage, if that makes sense, right? Because they're both doing damage to me, and if I go for the weaker one, then there's only going to be, and the majority of the time I'm fighting them, I'm going to be taking less damage. So what I want to do is, because these guys are hit scan, right? I want to go in, like here, for example, I shoot that guy right away because he's going to just do damage to me, right? I can't dodge his attack. He's just going to do damage. And when you get to, there's also a strategy when you're dealing with these blue guys here. Right, you always get the blue guys first because they always do damage to you, and they do a lot of damage to you. But these beige guys, these regular Marines or whatever they call them, kind of beige looking guys, they fire just one bullet and it's really inaccurate. But the blue guys, they fire a shotgun blast and it's a lot more accurate and it does a lot more damage. So with these blue guys, it doesn't really matter how far I am, but with the beige guys, the further I am, I'm not going to be taking as much damage from them. So it's kind of nice to be able to... I don't have a rocket launcher. I shouldn't be thinking that I have one either. Yeah. So just kind of like weeding the chaff, but also amongst the chaff, there's priorities, right? Like I want to weed out the guys that do more damage and have more accuracy first. So this is kind of the genius of this game. And another thing too is that you have to take into consideration is when you're playing this, these blue guys here, like they're blue. Like you can see that. So when I come around the corner, I see them right away. It's not like some subtle detail that I'm having to look out for that I barely notice half the time because it's a fast game. It plays fast, right? I need to see things right now. So they're designed to just be blue and stand out blue. And I think this is kind of like I was saying, this is a very important aspect of game design. And this very interesting thing actually I want to point out. Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal don't actually do this. As far as I'm concerned. I don't think they do. But there's like varying degrees of enemies and like the kind of damage they do. So like these guys here, they do instant hits kind of damage. You can avoid it if you're quick enough. If you're just right at the corner like this, you can slip behind something. When he aims at you and he'll shoot the wall. But that's it. I mean, if you come around the corner and you're committing to running out into the open, which is what you're going to do if like guys are throwing fireballs at you, you're going to like shoot these guys first like that, and they go down fast enough. You can take them all out before like they get off a shot off you, which is kind of the point, right? And in Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal, all enemies do projectiles. There was kind of like this fad going on at the time where like it was all based on movement. But the thing with movement is it's really finicky, because if you base the game solely off movement, then there's no incentive to play fast. And yes, you're moving fast, maybe, right? But sometimes you have to kill fast. And a large part of what makes original Doom really good was that you had these weaker enemies that would just do instant damage to you if you didn't kill them right away. And the weaker enemies in Doom Eternal and Doom 2016, you don't really have to attack them until they get close, unless they get close, because they don't have guns. You can just kind of snipe their heads off with guns and all that kind of stuff, and they can't really do anything about it if you're further than their reaching distance, because they're just melee units, and their only real purpose is to get in the way when you're attacking something bigger. So that's something I really want to elaborate on. But there's also a little more to orthogonal unit differentiation than meets the eye, and I'm going to get to that right away here. So, here I am playing Halo. I don't actually have Halo 3 or Halo 2 on my computer. I have it on my Xbox, but not on my computer. So I'm just going to be, showing what I have to say, basically just through the first Halo, because that's what I have on my computer. So Halo is the second game. I think Halo 3 probably does it best, but Halo's the second game I would say. I would say it's the second game, like next to Doom, that does orthogonal unit differentiation the best. And of course, I don't have Halo 3 on my console, so I'm just gonna on my computer. Sorry, so I'm just gonna be playing the first Halo. And so this is a very interesting point of orthogonal unit differentiation from a game like Halo. You have the little guys, they die right away, and then the big guys, they take more to kill. This is very basic, but one of the things you'll notice too is that these guys are half the size. That ensures that in certain situations you might not be able to hit them, but you might be able to hit the big guy. So like, it's not always clear in every single situation what you should do first. You might have to prioritize the big guys first, or you might have to prioritize the little guys first. And the weapons too is something that you have to take into consideration when you're working with O.U.D, because this weapon fires projectiles. It fires as fast as you pull the trigger. This weapon fires with a spread, and they're very different. They work very differently from each other. So like, each decision is meaningful. I'm not, there's no decisions that are basically like. There's no decisions that are basically like, well, I'm going to use the plasma pistol now, but it makes no difference whether I use that or the assault rifle. That should be, when you're making a video game, that should be as minimal as possible. It should absolutely make a difference in as many situations as you possibly can make it. So in order to do that, like see right there, for example, it made a difference whether I was using the assault rifle or not. Maybe not entirely. This game does have a lot of like crossover between the weapons, so it's not as good as Halo 3, but in terms of the differentiation between the weapons, it's not as good as Halo 3. But see, this thing will kill right away if I'm up close. I had to reload, so I switched my weapon. All these variables kind of work together to make it so that it matters what I do. Okay, it really matters what I do. So like, if I'm playing, I can play the game years from now, and I could be like, know all the situations for every little thing, right? Now again, I'm playing Pillar of Autumn, the first mission of Halo, which is like really close range. So it doesn't really all that make a difference. The range of my weapon doesn't really make all that much of a difference. When you get into open areas and long ranges, it starts to matter whether I'm using the assault rifle or not because it's a close range weapon. And these elites, they have shields. That's something you also have to consider. The grunts don't have shields. So like that's another difference that they have that makes it so that you want to you really want to elaborate on that difference, right? When you're playing the game because it's like, well, I've got an assault rifle which is a bullet weapon and a plasma pistol which is a plasma weapon. Well, if I might be in a situation where the enemy's too far away for me to use a the enemy may be too far away for me to use the assault rifle, so I use the plasma pistol. But then I have to lead with it and other stuff like that. Okay, whatever. If the enemy is an elite, I might use my plasma pistol right away. If they're grunts, it's more important for me to be up close if they're in a large group, because if they're in a large group, the assault rifle works very well, and the assault rifle is good at close range. So see how like everything kind of works together, and if I'm having to get close, I'm having to maneuver in a way that gets me close. So then all of a sudden now how I maneuver around the world affects uh, whether I can get close or not, which affects how many grunts I can kill with the assault rifle when they're grouped together, right? Otherwise, I'm having to resort to the less effective tactic, simpler, less effective tactic. So that's something to consider. And but nobody really thinks when they make games like this, or at least I don't think they do. They don't really think like, oh, well, this is like the player's going to be like doing this and that when we do this. What they do when they make these games is they're just basically like, okay, this gun functions like this, and it's very drastically different than how this gun functions. This enemy functions like this and behaves like this, and their AI is like this, and it's very drastically different than how this enemy behaves, and their hitbox size and AI and the damage, that they take and stuff is different, right? And that's another thing too, is like damage types really help with that. Plasma pistols are better against shields, so I might want to use them against shields or plasma rifles, plasma weapons in general. Right. So then again, it's like, well, if plasma weapons are good against shields and bullet weapons are good up close, it may not seem like a huge difference, but then you combine that with the fact that my bullet weapon I need to be up close with my bullet weapon because it's a shotgun or an AR. Then all of a sudden, and you take into consideration that you know the target is flinching or is not flinching, or they're a weaker target, or they're a big target, or all these variables tie together and create a game that's just like infinitely complex without being complex, if you know what I mean. Like if I were to analyze every single possible outcome for every single situation and every single weapon and unit and whatever, it would just be impossible because so many variables go into it, and each variable uh, affects the game differently, right? Like, see, I find that in a lot of situations in this game, I could just kind of run around and kill everything with. So I could have done that stuff with an AR, right? It would have killed the grunts faster and the elite slower. Um, but that would be an example of like a decision that wasn't meaningful to like use the plasma pistol in that situation, because it wouldn't matter whether I used the AR or the plasma pistol. But that being said, Halo, Halo, like games are always full of those kind of things, right? Because it's a shooting game, and there's going to be situations where I just need a gun to shoot, and that's what all guns do. So it doesn't matter what gun I use. But the less that's the case, the less it's the case that I can use a gun for the same reason I can use another gun, then the more differentiation there's going to be. The more of a meaningful decision it's going to be whether I use this gun or that gun. So that's just like something to consider, right? It's kind of hard. I can't tell you about every single thing in the game and be like, oh, if you do this, you have to do that, and da 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 da. That comes with like experience, but that's the whole point. You want like a game that has longevity. The best thing to do is have, you know, you swarm the player with just like things that are drastically different from each other. That's basically it, right? If you're wondering why I switched the assault rifle to this, I'll shoot a guy a few times with the plasma pistol, switch the assault rifle. That's just out of habit because I really like the AR. That's not like, that's totally the wrong thing to do when I'm holding on to the plasma pistol. I might as well just shoot a guy with it. So that's just something that like I really wanted to talk about today because it's super important. It's a must know to like any game designer who wants to get into games and like develop first person shooters or third person shooters. Okay, have different enemies, have a variety of enemies, have a variety of weapons. Have weapons that make them not redundant. Make them totally different from each other. Just look at any given thing that's similar and be like, how can I make this different, right? Because chances are, if you make it different, it's going to result in something that's different, right? It's going to be something that's considered down the line. Someone's going to be like using a shotgun and be like, oh, well, this guy is too small or big or whatever, right? Or this guy is too small at the distance I'm trying to attack from. I'm going to attack this bigger guy or something like that, right? Something you won't even think of. Just as long as you keep things different and you vary things up and keep them different and you make them drastically different from each other, it'll work out somehow, right? And it helps to know like how your game is. Like if there is guns that have like big reticles and that are, shoot all over the place or whatever, like big shotgun spreads like Halo, having like enemies that are like really small and enemies that are really big might be good for your game, right? Because that might be kind of like, oh, I have to be closer to attack these enemies that are smaller, but I can attack these big enemies at a medium range or something like that. That might be something that the person considers when they make decisions. Like, oh, I only have like one round left, and if I don't, and I need to shoot somebody because they're both doing damage to me, and I need to halve the damage I'm taking, or I'm going to die by the time I get to cover. I have to shoot somebody. I'm going to shoot the guy I can shoot, so I'm going to shoot the big guy or something like that. These are just, you can't foresee all of the circumstances the person is in, but if you kind of look at what's going on, like, certain variables just tie into each other, and like how, like things intuitively learned things interact with each other, like I was describing, and accommodate that and work together to create like a game based on that, then you can create pretty interesting situations in your game. Because just as long as if you got that going on, then the game will play differently all the time. Because all you need to do is be like, oh, well, this weapon's not available, and this guy, and the majority of enemies are these guys rather than these guys, and you just change a few things around, and the game plays as a completely different game because the things are different from each other. So when you switch them around and change them around and stuff, the game plays differently. It plays, it's like a one game, but it can be any game. It's like so many different games, right? It's like Halo isn't just Halo. It's like Halo's like a bunch of games that are Halo. Because when you take something and you switch it out with something else, or you're like, oh, now there's no assault rifles, it's just pistols. Oh, now there's no, plasma rifles. Now it's just like, the jackals, and it's jackals and plasma pistols, or it's jackals and shotguns. It's going to play out very differently than like, a mix of grunts and jackals with a shotgun or with an AR. You see what I'm saying? Like you combine things in different ways, then you have a very different experience, right? Then it's like suddenly, if you have this instead of that, it's a completely different game. And that's really important because I think a lot of games that don't respect orthogonal unit differentiation, they can't fill the shoes of being like a whole bunch of different type of games, and be a whole bunch of different games at once, because they don't have the foundation to set up different experiences and be a completely different game when it needs to be a completely different game, to change it up to be a different experience, right? And if you just say have enemies that are the same and weapons that are the same with just like statistical differences, like, oh, this is an M16 and this is an AK-47, right? But they both like, one is slightly less accurate and fires a little slower, and that's it. Then like the game's not going to be it's not going to be a totally new experience that like blows a person off their feet when you swap all the M16s with AK-47s. You see what I'm saying? Like, and that's why it's important to make sure that things are different, so you can create different experiences with your game, right? So that your game changes up and it plays as a different game all the time. Then the person's never bored because there's always something new. It's like, oh, this is a completely different situation than my last situation. I'm having to deal with this with these tools, and that's completely different than the last situation. So it's a different game, and that keeps you interested and thinking intentionally as to what you should and shouldn't do. Now, for games like Halo and Doom, it's very easy to say that I've been playing them long enough that I don't really make decisions. I just kind of like, pick up whatever and stuff, which is kind of why I use Halo 3 as an example of a game that like does this really good, because Halo 3 has the right amount of ammunition for the guns to keep you switching between guns and keep you playing with the sandbox, right, in new and interesting ways. And I don't have Halo 3, unfortunately, on my PC, so I just played the first one, but that would be like a really good example of like what I'm talking about. So thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe, and well, see you later.